I don't think that this is actual malice. I think somebody edited it. They should have kept that one clip in. They didn't keep that one clip in. He's going to argue his reputational harm, which means he's got to present evidence, Trump, of his reputation and his financial harm. So he's going to have to come in with certified financial records. Trump does not like to do that.
Now, the outgoing Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, has told staff to fight for their journalism a day after the US President Donald Trump threatened to sue the corporation for $1 billion over the editing of his speech before the Capitol riots of January the 6th.
It's been a tough few days, hasn't it? And very tough. And I want to say to everyone, I really know that these moments in the BBC, I've lived them actually as a staff member. I've seen the BBC go through very tumultuous times, and they can be discombobulating. You can ask questions of, where is the BBC going? Are we rudderless? What happens to the future? And they're stressful. They're difficult. And maybe one of my biggest emotions at the moment is I care desperately about the organisation. The thousands of people who work for it, with every cell of my body, I think are absolutely wonderful in what they do. I think we've got to fight for our journalism. I'm really proud of our work, and the amazing work locally, globally that we're doing is utterly precious. We have made some mistakes that have cost us, but we need to fight for that. And I'm fiercely proud of that.
So what should the BBC do? Are they really at risk of a massive financial hit from the most powerful man in the world? Let's talk to David Katz, who's a former assistant US attorney in Los Angeles. Good evening to you, David.
Great to be with you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. How serious do you think President Trump is when he says that he's going to sue the BBC for $1 billion?
I think he's quite serious. Now, he may be mollified a little bit that those two top officers at the BBC, I guess, resigned. But he's done this in America. Now, of course, in America, he has a lot more power because he controls the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and they're responsible for approving these mergers and so forth of big media. So big media is terrified of him. He has a huge stick to hit them with. And that would be my explanation of why, let's say, ABC paid a lot of money, and one of the other big commercial news broadcasting stations here paid an awful lot of money. But both of those companies were looking to make mergers with other firms. He doesn't have that kind of power over the BBC. So I think he probably will go ahead with the suit. He's going to pursue it in federal court in Florida. One of the interesting issues for the BBC is whether this particular broadcast of Panorama was shown in the United States. If it was not shown at all in the United States, then I would think that that would be one of the many reasons why the Florida court there might send the case to the UK for trial. And one of the interesting issues about trying the case in the UK is that Trump and his smart lawyers let the statute of limitations run in the UK. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, it is a fascinating scenario. Of course, the BBC, through its chairman, has already apologised for that Panorama programme. It went out over a year ago, and the BBC has apologised for the edit in that, in which they edited the speech which President Trump made to his supporters before the riots at the Capitol of January the 6th, 2021. And they left out the comments where he talked about those supporters going to march patriotically and peacefully, and then spliced it together. Now, I mean, if the chairman, Samir Shah, repeats that apology and says to Donald Trump, I'm sorry, it was a mistake in the editing, it should never have gone out. I mean, do you think President Trump, is that going to be enough to satisfy the president?
I'm not sure, because it looks like there are two things that Trump wants from these lawsuits. One is to, stand on top of his victim, like the dominant monkey, and beat his chest. And whether that's enough beating of his chest in this situation, we'll have to see. Also, he's shown himself quite willing to take a chunk of change. So he might want to relieve the BBC and the British taxpayers of a chunk of change, and whether the British taxpayers would stand for that to line Trump's pocket, again, we'll have to see on that. But your reporting is wonderful of what the key problem is, and in the legal problem. In the United States, they reported the speech. Now, Trump spoke for more than an hour right before the marauding of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. No one, especially a news summary, could have listed the whole hour-long speech. So some editing had to occur. Normally, what happened in the United States was they showed the one line about peacefully and patriotically. And my recollection is that it's just one line in an hour-long speech. It does say we need to fight. Trump does say we need to fight like hell. But he also made that one line. So in the United States, it was always run. And then the commentator would say, well, that's like a gangster. You know, a gangster says he's going to burn down a place and, rants for an hour. And then meanwhile, he says one line. Of course, it's going to all be within the law, and then try to have a legal defense that he said that one line, it's all within the law. So it was, cited in the United States by a lot of the top media outlets as being just another example of Trump's gangsterism. And of course, he put that one line in there. He was clever enough, and then that would be his defense. And in the United States, that's been his defense. The error in judgment was when they did the clip, when they did the editing in the UK on that show, they left out that line patriotically and peacefully, only one line, but they left out that one line, and that was the error in judgment. And I think some people have been, they've been punished, I think, internally, some journalists, some editors. But again, whether that'll be enough for Trump, we'll have to see. And he may want to play out the lawsuit. And I think before the BBC pays a lot of money, they'll play out the lawsuit on their side, seeing if they can get a change of venue, seeing if they can get it dismissed. You have to show actual malice under the law, and actual malice very hard to show. And again, the fact that he's supposedly shown it in a couple of lawsuits here, in very dubious lawsuits, a lot of people here think that that's because he had a sort of Damocles over the head of these American media companies that he doesn't have over the BBC, and that Trump did not win here because he was right. It was might made right. And these media companies in America settled with him because might makes right, and he's the sitting president.
Yeah, and I mean, President Trump does really care about the media coverage. I'm looking at statistics that show that there have been 34 cases against various different bits of the media. But most of them, as you've pointed out, the organizations concerned have settled out of court because, I mean, they would rather not risk the huge potential damage, both financially and reputationally, of actually going to court with the US president, particularly when, as you point out, in the US, he can control things like, for example, their efforts to take over other media companies or so on. And I mean, that doesn't apply in this case, does it?
It's so interesting, your comment, because you take CBS, which was, the Walter Cronkite. It was the cornerstone of American broadcasting. Its reputation's been shattered. The fact that they were willing to settle with Trump, their reputation's been shattered. You might wonder why they would shatter their reputation and fork out for them a relatively small amount of money. Well, because they had a multi-billion-dollar merger going. They were going to merge with Paramount, and Trump's administration gave the okay to the Paramount merger after Trump forked out the money. And then, of course, he gloats that I was in the right. And very few people in America, at least that I know, think that he was in the right. And as I said before, the BBC has a huge reputation to protect, and I think they'll stand up for their reputation. You're there over in the UK, but looking at it from this side of the pond, they have a huge responsibility, to be objective. And in this polarized environment, all the people who don't like their reporting, even if it's objective, they don't like it on Gaza, they don't like it on trans, they don't like it on this and that. And it's a really difficult situation. Then I guess they're resented over there because of that fee that they charge, and all their competitors, of course, have to compete for ads, which I guess the BBC does too. But I think
the BBC doesn't. That's the whole point about the BBC. It doesn't compete for advertising because it is paid for by the license fee here, and that is something which is due to be considered when we look at the future funding of the BBC. But I mean, what is interesting is that in this country, politicians from right across the board have said that the BBC should not be cowed by this threat from the US president, that yes, it does need to take action to address some of the editorial mistakes that have been taken and that have been made, but that it should not be cowed by this. And I mean, If the BBC was to simply point out to the US president that the only money they've got is that of ordinary BBC license fee payers, ordinary citizens of the UK, I mean, is there any chance that President Trump, who clearly is no fan of the BBC, might actually just accept a grovelling apology?
It depends how groveling, I suppose. And, he does want to have a good relationship with the prime minister. Maybe the king has to intercede. He has these sort of royal fantasies, our American president. Thousands of people died in our revolution so that we wouldn't have a king. But Trump is obviously fascinated with that. So maybe your king needs to ask him to show mercy for the BBC. But I really don't think it's going to come to that. I think the BBC is going to fight. I think they have good arguments. And I think if this case weren't transferred out of Florida, if it weren't transferred to the UK, if it weren't dismissed, I don't think that this is actual malice. I think somebody edited it. They should have kept that one clip in. They didn't keep that one clip in. He's going to argue his reputational harm, which means he's got to present evidence, Trump, of his reputation and his financial harm. So he's going to have to come in with certified financial records. Trump does not like to do that. So that may be exactly when the lawsuit goes away, $5 million. Maybe your British taxpayers would stand for $5 million. If the cost of litigation against Trump is $8 million, they'll pay the $5 million. And Trump will, of course, stand up and tell the whole world he beat the BBC. The BBC is opinionated, blah, 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 blah. That may be how it ends, but I sure hope from this side of the pond that the BBC fights. We admire the BBC over here. Our PBS, our public broadcasting, was just totally defunded by the Republicans and Trump.
David Katz, former assistant U.S. attorney in Los Angeles. It's been great to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Nice to have me.
Marcus, who loves to get in touch on any legal issues, says, shouldn't we simply say that Trump's absolutely no legal leg to stand on for his litigation against the BBC? And Jim says Donald Trump's vindictive and hates the media unless they're supporting him. If he doesn't get what he wants, he's likely to hit the UK with sanctions. He says he behaves like a spoiled child. And Jim, I'm glad to know that you are enjoying our coverage. Do keep your thoughts coming into us here on Times Radio.